The first thing the CO2 does, among other things, it traps the heat from the sun, and as a consequence of that, the planet is getting warmer. And historically speaking, this is a good thing. Without CO2 in the atmosphere, we'd be living on a snowball Earth. So we need a certain amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And we have wobbled between 180 parts per million during the ice ages to about 280 parts per million when we're out of the ice ages. And we have now pushed that up. And by now we have crossed the 400 parts per million mark. And we are going up about 2.5 parts per million a year. And there's no question that we are doing this. The pain comes after it's long too late, because there is a 50 to 60 year, if not longer, delay between having put the greenhouse gases in the place and the oceans actually having warmed up. Just because we got to 400 ppm, we haven't experienced that world yet. Energy is such a large player in the system. We do need a brand new energy infrastructure. I don't think we can just fix the one we have. And it better be affordable, clean, carbon neutral, and don't introduce its own new set of environmental issues. And I think right now, solar energy is by far our best hope, because it's getting cheaper and cheaper, but we have to overcome the inherent intermittency issues we have. With energy, we need to do three things. We need to extract it. That could be a solar panel, that could be a coal mine. We need to convert it into a useful form. And then lastly, we have to clean up after ourselves. And I argue these are roughly 3/3. So far, we have taken the point of view that we can just dump it in the atmosphere, that the atmosphere is big and can handle it, right? And then we found out the atmosphere is not big enough. And this is the same story we had with sewage in the 19th century. And people said, well, a little bit of slop hasn't hurt anybody yet. Well, we need to stop at 450 parts per million, which is the goal set by the IPCC. You can think of this as a translation of the 2-degree warming. At current trends, we are about 17 years away from hitting 450 ppm. Right now, we say it would be nice if we could reduce it, it would be nice if we could recycle it, but if we fail, dumping it in the atmosphere is acceptable, and we have to stop that.
This is a really key point. To stabilize at any temperature, we have to get to net zero.
And that's what got me started. When I started, I said, this was in the early 90s, and climate models weren't all that good yet. And I said, I don't really care whether the number is 350, 450, or 550, or even 750, right? We need to stop. And the change I have right now is we're already in an overshoot, and we will have to bend the curve back down at the end. I think that overshoot is on the order of 100 ppm. That is more CO2 than was emitted in the 20th century. So even if I could stop overnight, you have a very serious residual carbon dioxide problem. The fact that I cannot stop overnight will make it even harder. So we have an enormous sequestration effort in front of us. And at this point, it's not a question of whether we like carbon sequestration. We gave up on that option in the 1980s and 90s because we decided not to do anything. We have littered the atmosphere with so much carbon that we have to clean up after what we already did. So one central technology to make this work, not the only one, but one central technology is the ability to pull CO2 back out of the air. We are grossly underestimating what it will take to stabilize these things. If people say we need to have 3-4 gigatons of negative emissions per year, that's wishful thinking. Okay. And you can ask, how could I possibly get the carbon dioxide back out of the environment? Well, you have three options. You either get it from the biomass, which is you're growing things, and photosynthesis picks up CO2 out of the air, and that works. But you actually would have to dedicate more area than we currently have dedicated to agriculture. that sets the scale. And don't get me wrong, I'm not telling you we shouldn't do that. In a portfolio, it will play part of it. Secondly, you could collect CO2 from the ocean. I argue there are actually some fundamental issues because you are hidden behind 25,000 molecules of water for every molecule of CO2, whereas in the air, the 400 ppm translates into 1 in 2,500. I think from a technological perspective, your best bet is the atmosphere. Yes, we know we can do that because if you are in a submarine, people do this routinely. If you are in a spacecraft, people will do that routinely. The challenge is not can we do it, but can we do it at a price the world can afford. And if we keep it at $500 a ton, that's an economic collapse. If we can get it to $50 a ton, the world will hardly notice that it had to fix it. But if we can get down to $100 a ton, we start looking interesting, and I think we are within striking distance. Any technology people have is sorbent-based.
Sorry, what's sorbent? What is a sorbent?
You have something which binds the CO2 as it flows over it.
Okay.
Our absorbent has the remarkable features when it's dry, it loves CO2. And when it's wet, it doesn't. This thing has air blowing through it.
Yeah.
With our current design, in about 20 minutes, it's soaked, it's full. It now collapses into this box. We spray water in. Now it's moist, and the air inside will enrich itself with CO2, and then I have pumps and compressors taking it out. The recapturing process figure is roughly a third extra.
A what?
A third extra. Your energy consumption is 1/3 larger than if you had ignored the problem in the first place.
You are saying that it'll cost us 33% extra energy to have a system where you take care of the carbon.
Yes, if you want to clean up after yourself, you will need energy.
Yeah.
What's it look like when you get some carbon? Is it a liquid or is
It's
it
CO2
like...
gas. And you can compress it to 100 atmospheres, then it's a liquid.
Okay, so you get CO2 gas, you compress it to a liquid, then you have to stick that liquid somewhere.
You pipeline that to an oil well.
You can't convert it to a solid somehow.
Yes.
That's mineral carbonate.
Okay.
We could be in Morocco where you have basalts, and we could inject the CO2 into the basalt formations right there, and thereby permanently form solid carbonates underground, which put the CO2 away. You need 60 square meter of frontal area of these. Think of these things this wide, this tall when they are closed, and then about 8 meters tall. So you need about a dozen of them to fill into a shipping container, and that would give you a ton of CO2 a day. And we want 36 gigatons a year. Now, you would need 100 million shipping containers to knock the CO2 back off. If you look at a car engine, it costs about $10 a kilowatt. A power plant costs $1,000 a kilowatt. So the mass production of the car engine, we argue, is what makes it so cheap. So I see us not building very huge collectors, but instead build collectors on the, let's say, ton-a-day scale. We build 80 million cars and trucks a year. And Shanghai Harbor sends out 30 million filled containers a year. So clearly, industrial production can reach these scales without getting completely bent out of shape. So I'm arguing this is a very large scale, no doubt about it. But it's also a very large problem. So it's clear you had to operate at a very large scale. On the other hand, the scale is not so prohibitively large that you would throw up your arms and say, we have never done anything like that. Yes, we are doing things on this scale routinely. I want to make one more point. Once you have it, it will take 40 years to pull things back down, right? We actually have to come to a societal agreement that if you want to use a ton of fossil fuel carbon, you better put a ton away, and it is certified that you did that. Governments could go in and buy these certificates of sequestration off the market and void them. The moment they did that, you actually have a true negative emission. Today, the polluter is the one who has control over fixing the problem. If you have air capture, they lost that control. You can now say, well, if you don't want to fix it yourself, we fix it for you and we'll send you the bill. You'd be surprised how fast that power plant operator would figure out that they internally themselves can fix this problem much faster. So I would argue we're actually not slowing down action. We actually, by democratizing the process of doing it, taking it away from the polluters, we actually will accelerate the process rather significantly.